Hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Of course, first of all, I am Gwansa Jobawa. I'm the president of the International Publishers Association, and I'm really pleased to present a very important topic which we are going to discuss. Actually, our speaker, Peter Schopper, will be talking about the subject, which is the title of today's speech will be Who is Writing? Rights and Responsibilities in the AI-Empowered World. For IPA, of course, AI and copyright together, it's a very important topic, and we are very much closely looking at the subject to see where AI is driving the world and what we should be doing for protecting our intellectual property and our copyright. So Peter Schoppert, we are really pleased and honored to have him as a speaker today, because he built his 40-year-old career in Singapore book industry, and right now he is the vice president of the Singapore Book Publishers Association. So before I give him the floor, and of course the most important part and interesting part will be his expertise sharing with us about AI subjects, but first I want to give the floor to Katrina Stevenson, who is sitting on the left side from us. And Katrina is the co-chair of IPA Copyright Committee. As you probably have heard, for IPA, copyright is a most important pillar, so we are working hard. Together with Louis Simpson, who is another co-chair of this committee, Katrina is doing, of course, important work. She was recently elected there as a chair, but yeah, she has already actively started her work, and we appreciate it a lot. So I would like to give the floor now to Katrina to maybe cover a little bit in details AA subject, and of course related to the copyright issues, and then we will give the floor to Peter. So please.
Thank you, Gwansa. Good to be here. I'm Katrina. I'm the General Counsel and Deputy CEO of the Publishers Association in the United Kingdom. We represent book and journal publishers across consumer, education, and academic publishing sectors. And as Gwansa said, we are a member of the International Publishers Association. And I recently took on the role of co-chair of the Copyright Committee. And AI is obviously of fundamental importance to the book and journal publishing sector, as it is to any other cultural industry. And it's a really important pillar of the work that's carried out by IPA under its copyright banner, as Gwansa said. And it's important to remember that publishers embrace AI in their operations, and they perform a crucial role in underpinning AI development, both as AI innovators in their own right and as the curators of the high-quality content that AI developers wish to use to create trusted and reliable AI models. Publishers also face a range of copyright challenges in their markets at what is a generationally important moment in which copyright-protected works have been used with abandon and without permission or payment in the development of generative AI platforms. And no more apparent is this than in the UK at present, where our government has recently consulted on AI and copyright, and the content and cultural industries have been fairly united in their response about the importance of granular transparency and the promotion of licensing as the appropriate mechanism for the development of AI in a legal, ethical, secure, and sustainable manner. So it's really an honor to work with the IPA team to champion the global importance of effective copyright and enforcement frameworks. And a very important figure in IPA's copyright work is our esteemed speaker today, Peter Schoppert. So Peter brings a scholar's rigor, a publisher's experience, a tech bro's enthusiasm for the rabbit holes of complex and technical data, and a teacher's gift of clarity and communication to what is a difficult job of bringing his colleagues and readers up to speed on the constantly and rapidly changing intersection of copyright and AI. And all with unflagging energy and good humor, I might add. Peter is an incredibly important asset to the work of the IPA, and we are really delighted that he has agreed to join us today to share his insights with the delegates of the SCCR. So without further ado, I would like to hand the floor to the remarkable Peter Schoppert.
Thank you very much, Katrina Gwanza, for that wonderful introduction. Yep. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's such a beautiful day. It's a little bit mystifying that you'd rather be in this room than not picnicking outside before the main session restarts. So thank you very much for being with us today. I'm going to talk about AI, but in fact, I'm really going to talk about literature. I hope you'll forgive me for this. I don't think we can pass through our Gen AI moment without reference to both science and the humanities. And that's true for two reasons. First of all, literature almost always anticipates science. And the second is that large language models specifically are language models. And they are themselves derived in interesting ways that we'll talk about, but they are derived from what was published before, from pre-existing works. So I think there's no question that the large language model belongs to the humanities as much as it does to computer science. If you have any doubts about the connection between literature and science, must get the copyright credits for the images, mustn't we? If you have any doubts about this connection between science and literature that I'm talking about, please read Question 7 by Richard Flanagan. It's a fantastic book. It discusses many important issues. But in particular, it talks about the way that the atom bomb was first invented by a writer, by H.G. Wells, who conceived of it and wrote about what its impact on the world would be. Long before it was a possibility in science. The physicist, Leo Szilard, who was the first one to see the possibility of the catastrophic chain reaction, he credits H.G. Wells and his reading of that book for giving him the idea. He credits reading that book and thinking about this possibility as the reason he became a nuclear physicist. And indeed, so he came up with the idea that if there was a material with certain properties, we could have a chain reaction that would cause an explosion of immense world-changing power. But he didn't know, there was no such material that he knew about at the time. In 1938, he learned of the properties of uranium and realized that this was a material that could cause such a chain reaction. He contacted Albert Einstein. Einstein and Szilard went to the US White House and says, you have to develop this technology. It's better that you develop it than certain other countries do. But when he learned about uranium, he reports in his memoirs, I remember thinking, H.G. Wells, here we come. So it was prefigured in literature. Can we find any such prefigurations of the large language model in literature? Indeed, we can. I think the whole field of AI development, certainly the whole discourse of AI development, is very much shaped by literary and indeed religious ideas. And I don't want to tackle that big subject, but I will use literature to help us understand a little bit more about the question of the topic, who is speaking when the AI speaks, when we see AI output, and what are the rights and responsibilities that should attend to that. So the first literary invention of a large language model that I could find is a little bit older than H.G. Wells. And I'm going to beg your indulgence to read you actually this description. It's a description of the writer, the hero of the book, going to a research institute. And among the things they were working on, among the things they were working on is, and now I'll quote, but it's up there on screen as well, a project for improving speculative knowledge by practical and mechanical operations. Everyone knew how laborious is the usual method of attaining to arts and sciences, whereas by this contrivance, this invention, the most ignorant person, at a reasonable charge and with a little bodily labor, may write books on philosophy, poetry, politics, law, mathematics, and theology. without the least assistance from genius or study. He then led me to a frame. It was composed of bits of wood about the bigness of a die, all linked together by slender wires. These bits of wood were covered on every side by paper, and on these papers were written the words of their language in their several moods, tenses, and declensions, but without any order. The professor's pupils, at his order, took each of them a hold of an iron handle, and giving it a sudden turn, the whole disposition of words changed in the machine. The professor showed me, I'm still reading from this, the professor showed me several volumes in large folio already collected. Out of these rich materials, we give the world a complete body of the arts and sciences. However, it might be much improved and much expedited if the public would raise a fund for making and employing more of these frames. He assured me that he had employed the whole vocabulary into this frame and made the strictest computation of the general proportion there is in books between the numbers of particles, nouns, and verbs, and other parts of speech. That's a pretty good description of a large language model. Strictest computation of the general proportion of words in books. Anyone know where this comes from? 1726, Jonathan Swift. It's there in Gulliver's Travels. Yeah. It's a description of the word loom, which was being developed at the research institutes of Legato. There really is nothing new under the sun. The strictest computation of the general proportion there is in books between different words. I've tested this out on computer scientists, and they say, yeah, that's it. It's a super complex statistical representation of the relationship of words in texts that have been fed into the model. So Swift imagined it 300 years ago. Actually doing that calculation took a while. So in the last 100 years, linguistics developed, and then more recently, computational linguistics. And today, we actually make that calculation. That's what the large language model is. And interestingly enough, we're living with the result that Swift foresaw. The most ignorant person, at a reasonable charge, and with a little bodily labor, well, actually a lot of electricity now, may write books in philosophy, poetry, law, politics, mathematics, and theology without the least assistance of genius and study. Go to Amazon today and you'll find tens of thousands of such books written by AI, often imitating or masquerading well-known human writers. Jonathan Swift's vision is here. Jonathan Swift, here we come. So where does that leave us? Okay, that starts us off on something. I want to spend a little bit more time, and it's going to get a little bit technical, but to understand the large language model, keeping Swift's definition in mind. In particular, I want to focus on the relationship between the model and the corpus of text that trains the model. The first thing to say is that models don't exist without their training material. You can set up the math, you can set up the equations, you can get the chips ready, but it doesn't function at all until you've started training on the material. And while the cliche is that models are trained by, quote, reading the internet, time and time again, we've seen the model developers realize that it's high-quality authored content that must be fed to the models to get them to work well. And I'll give you just one recent example, which comes from the, there we go. That comes from the discovery documents in some of the US copyright litigation around AI training. LibGen, do you guys all know what LibGen is? The huge pirated mass of works, of 7.5 million books and 85 million articles. LibGen is essential to meet SOTA, numbers across all categories, state of the art. And it is known that OpenAI and Mistral are using the library for their models. This is the Meta team that's responsible for this. And they're seeking permission to use LibGen to train their model, despite the political and legal risks, which they acknowledge fully in the documents. I obviously it's hearsay about OpenAI and Mistral, yeah? I mean, this is a direct memo. So the models depend on their training material, and in order to work at the top level, in order to give us the results, which are so amazing, they need to have worked on copyrighted text. But what is this dependency exactly? What has changed? What's going on in the model? What is the relationship once it's ingested the text? That's tough to kind of visualize. It's a highly complicated piece of math, but we're going to journey just a little way into that. So the first thing that happens is that we convert the text into tokens. We break it up. The most common, so you could have every word could be a token, or most commonly, they have what they call subword tokens. So words are parts of words. Spaces and punctuation also. So you have to take your PDF and extract the text, make sure that all the tags and HTML is filtered out, and then you break the text up into tokens. Then you convert the tokens to numbers. Every token has an ID, which is a number. And so you can represent the text as a series of numbers. But there's a dictionary there. So just because it's numbers, it's the text. You can translate back from the numbers to the text and from the text to the numbers, one for one. So there you see the example. The is number 1, mouse is number 2, the mouse, 1, 2, and so on. Then comes the mind-bending part. And that is that you map these token IDs, these numbers, onto a huge number of dimensions. Now, when we map locations, on a map that we use every day, we have 2 dimensions typically, right? Longitude and latitude, X and Y axis. When you're making a large language model, you're mapping onto hundreds of dimensions. They call a high dimensional space. And when they start off, this is a 4-dimensional space that we see in this diagram, right? 4 numbers is the location of this word in word space. But actually, the models are doing 724, 1,096 dimensions. So you start off and you map, you assign numbers to all of those words and token IDs. And then you start training the model. So you send in the text and you mask a word. And the model predicts what word. And it gets it wrong. So it then adjusts all of these numbers, and it tries again. And it tries again, and it tries again, and it tries again 1 million times, 10 million times, 1 billion times, actually, all happening in parallel. And when it gets the right answer, it fixes the number in space. So it fixes those numbers. I know it's very hard to visualize, but it's a kind of mapping of words and their relationship to each other. And not just words in relationship to each other, words in sentences. Because these models with the transformer, the T in GPT, is paying attention to the whole text, to paragraph lengths, to passages of text. This word in relationship to all the other words in that text and to their sequence. Okay. So this is the kind of modern map. We're assigning words coordinates in hundreds of dimensions. And the same word might have 2 or 3 different coordinates depending on its different meanings. There's the bank along the river, and there's the bank where we put our money. So you keep doing that. You get better and better prediction results. And then finally you decide to stop. You've run out of computer time. It's a huge amount of computer time required to do this for a huge amount of text, for millions of books. You've run out of computer time, or the model is kind of peaked. It's not really improving anymore, and you risk that things will actually get worse if you keep trying to improve it. So what do we have now? Remember, I'm trying to understand this relationship between the text and the model. So what do we have now in the model? Well, the proponents of AI like to emphasize the fact, and will tell you, that the model has learned. They'll acknowledge that that's a gross anthropomorphization. Oh, I managed to say that. A gross anthropomorphization of a statistical process. But The statistical process being Swift's computation of the proportion there is in books between different words. But the result, I mean, I'm sure you've all tried it, right? The result is a model that can answer questions grammatically, usually, and sometimes factually correctly. So the model must have some kind of internal representation of concepts and how they relate to each other. In fact, such a good representation of concepts does the model have that it can match the human in performing certain tasks. Yes, there are surprising blind spots. The model doesn't know how many R's there are in strawberry, or it doesn't understand spatial relationships, all the funny mistakes which the models make. But there's some level of a structure of understanding existing somewhere in the model. The shape of this understanding is deeply foreign to humans, however. When they output, the models output those vectors, right? So long string of numbers. And they have to translate that back into a word, right? So they have to take this dimensional space and reduce it to a word. So that's the last step of the model. This language of the vectors, scientists have started calling it neuralese. There we go, neuralese, sorry, James. That's the way that the model speaks to itself. So the idea is that, now we have these models which reason, which follow chains of thought. This recent paper has made a huge impact in the community, and the idea is that we'll do the reasoning before we turn it into words. We'll do the reasoning in vector space. We'll do the reasoning in neuralese. And that's great, we'll get more improvement of the models. What we will have trouble with is understanding how the models got those results, because this is now happening in an even more distant dimension to the one we understand. So yes, some of the AI companies have done some good work recently on helping understand how the model comes up with an answer, maybe one day even attributing original sources to outputs. But we also have these trends of making it even more difficult, with the models working more and more in their vector language, and we don't understand the concepts at work there. Now, that's one metaphor, right? This kind of understanding. The other metaphor, the engineers use both metaphors. They use, there's a shorthand that they use to talk about these things. This other metaphor is that the text is in the model. It's represented in the model. The writer Ted Chiang called it a fuzzy JPEG of the internet. The model is a fuzzy JPEG of the internet. AI researchers like Sebastian Rocca routinely speak of the training material is represented in the model. How else, we publishers might ask, is it that the models so easily reproduce their training material? How is it that they can repeat passages from well-known books verbatim? How is it that when asked to compose a song about the death of Buddy Holly, Claude recited the lyrics of American Pie? Why is it that the model builders need to spend all of their time, a lot of time, building filters and doing reinforcement learning, training, to stop the models from outputting their training material? They spend a lot of energy blocking and moving the natural tendency of the models to repeat their training material so that they don't do it to avoid legal risk. Let's just look at that in a little more detail. Thank you, James. So go up. Now, this is, I first kind of realized this back in 2022. This is a paper, a graphic in a paper that came from the Stanford Institute on AI and Humanity. And they're the ones who came up with the idea of foundation models, because they said these models will exist in systems and we need to be specializing them to do different tasks. We need to feed new information to them, and we need to patch them. And one of the patches is to make them copyright compliant. So this has already been going on for some time. And indeed, if we look at the discovery documents from the Cardi versus Meta case, there's the Meta memo, like, okay, you can use LibGen, but if any of the titles of the books in LibGen say pirated version of the book, then you better take it out. Well, not that many did. And we shouldn't externally tell anybody that we're using it. Please don't. And we will perform evaluations on the performance of the model and mitigations as necessary to reduce memorization metrics, the propensity to generate outputs containing, this is Meta's memo. The memorization rate should be brought down. We can't bring it down to 0. We should bring it down to the level which Llama 2 team has already achieved, and leadership of Meta has accepted the risk. I'm not trying to make a case against the model guys here. I'm just trying to persuade you that this metaphor is also a valid metaphor for what happens in the models. So which one is more valid? Are they some kind of mind that learns in some machine way? Or is the model a representation, a weird, compressed representation of its training material? I don't know. We'll keep pushing. We'll keep trying to understand. A lot more brain power than mine is needed to work on this. But I think it's important to recognize that these are both high-level abstractions, right? There are ways that we get a handle on what's happening on the model. And so I think both of them are valid and important, and neither of them are complete. So is the model understanding, or is it a derivative representation of what it was trained on? Yes. Don't buy into one or the other. They're both kind of true. And I do think that has certain implications for copyright. In framing their fair use arguments, the model builders like to say that they're not copying expression. They're only extracting facts from the texts. The statistical relationship between words, they say, is a fact. Okay? The text exists, it has these embeddings. This is a fact about the text. Well, here I do disagree very strongly. The statistical relationship between words in a text, especially when they can reproduce the whole text, it's so powerful it can reproduce the text, is in fact expression. I mean, the relationship between words is style, right? It embodies creativity, individuality, more than a modicum of creativity. For years, I mean, take a look back at old AI. We tried to build AI based on facts and concepts. We tried to model knowledge based on facts and concepts. That kind of AI was a dead end. It didn't really help go very far. It's only when we built systems based on actual, messy, contradictory human expression that we have systems that are actually useful. In the computational humanities, we've been using these techniques to identify an author's style for a long time. That's how the FBI caught the Unabomber. They analyzed his manifestos and compared them to letters from a certain Theodore Kaczynski, and they said, oh, this is the same guy. That's why the Italian writer Domenico Starnone must always say, no, no, I'm not the author, I'm not really Ella Ferrante, because the computational humanists at the University of Padua have analyzed his writing and Ella Ferrante's writing and said, same. So I won't try to litigate that debate. So when we train models, we're not extracting facts from the text, like a jewel from the matrix, like data mining, right? We're not pulling the text out. We're using the entire expression. We're deriving something from the expression. And the expression stays in the model while it's being trained. It's the expression that the model is testing itself against. So I feel very strongly about this. Sure, it may be up for debate, but I think there's no question that these models are different than the old text and data mining models that pulled facts out of the text. So the model functions are derived from the text. Derivative. Isn't that a technical term in copyright? The complainants in the Cadre and Meta case, which I've looked at some of the discovery documents. I've only dipped in and found so much interesting stuff. For them, the fact that the models depend on the data is already enough to conclude that large language models are derivatives of the text they were trained on. Now, I'm quite sympathetic to this view, but I equally see the problem, right? It rather stretches the imagination. The judge in the Kadri versus Mehta case said the idea made his head explode. I mean, copyright jurisprudence in the US is, here's the original, show me the copy, substantial similarity. Kadri's lawyers were arguing that the LLM is, and he was very offended, the novel and the LLM are so different, there's no similarity. But as I've outlined above, there might be similarity, but it's similarity to all of the models, to all of the text that it was trained on. Okay, I'm going to stop on that line of thought because our heads might explode. It's something quite new to try to imagine. But let's return back to where we were. Jonathan Swift, the models are strict computations of the relationships of words found in books, journals, and newspaper articles. The model depends on its training data. It's intimately tied to what it was trained on. It both understands that material in some unique machine way, but it also holds a compressed version of that training material inside its billions of parameters. It's not a database. It's not a collection of facts. LLMs are unreliable on facts, notoriously. It is a machine for creating expression based on the ingestion of protected expression. So we've characterized the model themselves, trying to understand this relationship. Now let's turn to the outputs. I'm very sorry we're half hour in and I've only got to my subject right now. Who speaks when the AI creates its output? Here I'm going to seek guidance from another literary figure, a bit more up-to-date than Jonathan Swift. Well, Jonathan Swift is ageless, clearly. In 1967, the French literary critic and semiologist Roland Barthes wrote an essay which famously called for us to unseat the author from our considerations of the text. In those days, the author was decidedly a he. It's an essay I read with great interest as an undergraduate, but it's only 40 years later that it's really become concrete. Only now have large language models arrived on the scene. Only now have we achieved what Barthes was calling for in this famous essay, the death of the author. I recommend the essay. It's short, it's epigrammatic and pithy, it's good fun to read. Barthes, like Swift, is anticipating the large language model. And his description of a world of text without authors could also stand as a definition of the LLM. I mean, the whole essay is a description of this LLM world of language. But here's one of the key lines. We know now that a text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of the author, God, but a multi-dimensional space in which a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. My God, how did he know? How did he envisage the large language model? The multi-dimensional space where writings are placed that then allows us to generate new writing. I mean, that's what he's, okay. Barthes saw the death of the author approaching, or the author receding, in what he called the prehistory of modernity. So he points to different writers, Mallarmé, Valery, the Surrealists, right? Because the Surrealists were always trying to create machines or games that would generate text. They were doing generation. So he sees this antecedent to the death of the author. But it's finally the scientific, or should we say statistical, understanding of text, of language, that will deliver the coup de grace. I'm going to read you another paragraph. Replace the word linguistics is what he uses. I'm going to replace it with large language model, in a way, a final development of a certain kind of linguistics. And we brought Barthes to the present day. I don't have this one on a slide. LLMs have recently provided the destruction of the author with a valuable analytical tool by showing that the whole of enunciation is an empty process, functioning perfectly without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutors. No speaker is necessary. I'm amazed how Barthes anticipates the LLM. His interpretation, I think, if he hadn't been hit by a bus, of our current moment, would be that it's not so much that LLMs have learned to write like humans, but LLMs reveal that all writing is a kind of statistical process. In fact, it's humans who write like LLMs. Here we come, Roland Barthes. Barthes' view is echoed in many of the statements that we've heard from AI promoters. It may have even shaped their visions of what writing is, especially if they read too much French theory at school. Everything is influenced by what came before. All your writing is just a recomposition of what happened before. There's nothing new under the sun. You're no better than an LLM. Computational linguist Emily Bender wrote that very important paper on stochastic parrots, that speech formally requires communicative intent, that to speak is to communicate, and since machines don't have intent, they cannot produce speech, it's just stochastic parrots, kind of repeating with randomness. There is no causation, there's no motor, there's no speaker, there's no there. We've been fooled by statistics, again. The AI fans reply, the models are stochastic parrots, so's your mother. So in Barthes' view, more satirical than cynical, but it's hard to be sure, the writings that blend and clash in vector space are not original because they themselves are output of the same space. He doesn't theorize how we got there, what were the first texts. But here, we're in this room, this building, because we're looking at things through the lens of copyright, the liberal institution which brings us together. And we see LLMs as being a multi-dimensional space in which a variety of writings, many of them original and copyrighted, blend and clash. So now we have hundreds of millions of people engaging with this empty process of enunciation, with chatbots producing verbiage without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutor. Don't get me wrong, I'm using those engines all the time. You and I might choose to appropriate this LLM output under our own name, right? Under our own authorship. So people are using it to cut and paste into forms they have to fill in, into sales pitch letters, into thank you notes, grant applications, job interview questions, letters of recommendation even, some of my friends. All that kind of pro forma communication that is a bit of a chore. Well, we can save some time. And of course, you all, if you do that, I'm sure you edit it, you make sure it stands for what you are saying. You polish it, you claim the speech as your own, and you take responsibility for it, right? So this is the use of AI that is, the responsibility is taken by the writer. So I may use the tool. This is AI as tool. I use it, but I use it to create something which I put my name on. When I first started playing around with GPT-3, when it was still in beta, I kind of thought this is what generative AI and LLMs would be. It would be a great tool that we could all use. But in fact, there's other kinds of uses. And I think there are two other contexts that we need to worry about. The first is AI that hides behind a fake name or a byline. So AI output which pretends to be from a human. So this is happening a lot already, not just from misinformation and disinformation experts, but from lots of folks. And the second, of course, is what is it when the AI speaks in its own voice as a chatbot? What does ChatGPT say? What does Claude say? So we've seen we're beginning to see this AI-generated misinformation and disinformation. A recent study of a misinformation database concluded that about 5% of it was in AI, but that percentage had gone from 0 the year before to 5% in 2023. We'll see what the numbers are for 2024 and 2025. It happened first in Polish and in French, as captured in this database. It's coming for all of us, I'm sure. And then, so that's all I'll say about the AI pretending to be a human. The AI in its own voice. Government policymakers and representatives of various constituencies are very worried about this AI voice, its values. What are the values of the AI? Remember, there's no speaker there to have values, but we're all concerned about it. In my part of the world, in Southeast Asia, minority communities are being encouraged to contribute their text to AI training so that they can be represented in the AI output. They're clamoring to be let in, to be represented. Every country is working on its own sovereign AI so that the values and particularities of expression can be reproduced by the AI. My favorite example of this was an ad spotted. An American Christian evangelical was seeking to hire new engineers to create AIs because the existing AIs, he claimed, were skewed with liberal, globalist, Talmudic, satanic worldviews, whatever those might be, right? So there is a great fear, a great anxiety, a great desire to control the voice of the AI, because we all believe that it's got a certain power beyond the human. I think this focus on representation is, well, at least I can say it's focusing attention on that question. Who is speaking when the AI speaks? Who is responsible when the AI speaks in its own voice? The only thing I'll say in thinking this through, I'm really putting this on the agenda more than giving an answer, is that it's corporate speech. It's not an individual speech. There's a lovely book called The Literary Theory for Robots, which explores this a little bit. The output of an LLM is a corporate product, not just in the sense of having been created for a profit, but it's a complex assemblage of people and finance capital and machines and electricity and different interests and the text that was used to train it. And that's all involved in creating this kind of speech. When we see a chatbot, we think of a person. We can't help it. That's how our brains are wired. But in fact, it's the creation of this complex. I think we should worry a little bit more about this. I think in the United States, for example, despite my 40 years in Singapore, I'm still a US citizen. The mistake about understanding the difference between individual speech and corporate speech in the Citizens United Act on corporate finance was a huge error. So the freedom that should be given to individuals to speak was given to corporations to spend money on elections. $280 million we have Elon Musk in the White House with his T-shirt. So I think we need to think very carefully about that. And obviously the ongoing discussions in the EU on liability of AI speech are very important. They are seeking to push the liability for this speech onto the last person who gives the prompt. But I think that needs to be looked at quite critically. I think if we superpower corporate speech in this way, we make the public sphere, which I think is essential to democratic functioning, we make it even harder to maintain. And so re-looking at Death of the Author all those years later, you reread what Barthes says this world is like when the reader is supreme and the author is dead. It's a world where ChatGPT floods the zone, where the internet is just AI-originated pink goo, I think is the technical term. He says, in the multiplicity of writing, everything is to be disentangled, nothing to be deciphered. He sees in this state the end of order, reason, science, and law. In precisely this way, literature, it would be better now to say writing, I'm quoting Barthes now, by refusing to assign a secret, an ultimate meaning to the text and to the world as text, liberates what might be called an anti-theological activity, an activity that is truly revolutionary, since to refuse to fix meaning is in the end to refuse God and is hypostases, reason, science, and law. In 1967, true revolution might have seemed a very desirable possibility in Paris. But the passage of time makes this essay read much less well. Given the developments in the world, this refusal to fix meaning and claim that there can be no meaning looks a lot more sinister. What for Barthes might be satire, might be provocation, it's now used by people who follow a post-truth strategy. The desire to kill the author looks very sinister now when we see these strategies of post-truth, the confusion of meaning, the false equivalencies between the consensus, the scientific consensus on climate change, and the manufactured doubt, which is funded by, natural gas billionaires in the US or whatever. When we see the strategies of Putin and of Trump, I think we have to be very cautious about this move to think that text is just an endless cut and paste. The individual who takes responsibility for the text is important. French literary theory might have a little bit to answer for. Now, this is a much bigger issue than we can discuss at a copyright forum. Thank you for indulging me in exploring it a little bit, but I do believe copyright has a place here in helping us navigate and govern this world. Because copyright is a right, but it's also a part of a system of responsibilities. On the copyright page of every book, publishers put their address. Okay, we're claiming ownership of the right or license to the right, but we're also taking responsibility for that. If you want to sue us, here is the address. Unfortunately, in some parts of the world, if you want to arrest us, here's where you can find us. We take responsibility together with our authors. I think that's a kind of superpower of publishing that is more and more important in today's world. It's not what we're seeing from big tech. Here we go, Roland Barthes. So Barthes' favorite novelist is, I'm trying to reread him madly now as I see how much he's prefigured. His favorite novelist was Flaubert, Gustave Flaubert, because Barthes saw in him the writer who, having mastered the great 19th century novel, he understood one of its key problems, that when we read the novel, we confuse the world of text with real life, and we start to make decisions based on, what we've learned from a novel. The great confusion of life with words. We're all subject to this. I feel if we are not more critical about generative AI, if we see it as something more than just an artifact of words, a very useful artifact of words, if we pin our hopes on the future of the world, of economic growth of our country, uncritically, then we'll end up a bit like Flaubert's most famous character, who did the same, who believed that the world should follow what she read in books, and ended, that's Madame Bovary, of course, and ended disillusioned and a suicide. On that sad note, I end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. My brain is exploded. I don't know about yours.
Microphone for the speaker, please.
Speech. I would like you all to thank Peter Shoppard for coming all the way from Singapore and letting us share in his mind space.
The speaker cannot be interpreted as he is speaking off mic.